Steve. Okay, hello. Welcome to Quarters. Alright. Awesome, cool. We can start straight away now. Hi, my name is Gelson. I'm your chair for the round. I have two panelists with me. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm with good luck for the round.
Hi, Taydo.
Okay, cool. That being said, I use he pronouns, but feel free to address the panel as a whole. Everything should be cool, so we can start around the motion about Israel and the 6-day war. Okay, we can start around. I invite the Prime Minister to open up the debate. Just give me a second.
Okay. POI from closing or preferably the statement onwards. Probably onwards, okay. As the IR wager is around, I'm going to immediately bring up this in 4 different parts. Firstly, let's talk about justification. Let's talk about a few preemptives regarding, for example, will US intervention be a problem? But lastly, let's talk about why, even isolated of the outcome, this is a war that's necessary. Let's start with number 1, and I'm immediately going to outframe the problem with US intervention. I think here's the reality that we have to talk about. This is a situation in which we need to look into, firstly, is the US capable to have an intervention or a response in Israel? I think there are multiple reasons why the United States isn't able to do so. One, there's an election that's upcoming within the United States. But number 2, and I think here's where it's much more important, is the reality around the demographics of the United States. There are a lot of individuals who are moderate and conservative really don't want to spend more money outside of the United States. By virtue of this, the average American and most parties' strategy is to reduce interventionism. The reality here means that by virtue of the election not happening yet, right, that a lot of these policies will be more isolationist in nature. 2 then, and here's where we go back into the region and the conflict, is to understand the justification of war, what we call casus belli. Is there a justification of war for those countries to engage with Israel? I think this is important. It is to prove that firstly, Israel has necessarily been extremely aggressive in its stances. Number 1, its long-range attacks in Syria. Number 2, the pager explosion, right? I think these are multiple examples of why Israel is extending the war beyond Palestine, and is a legitimate fear for those countries. By virtue of this, I think it's about war strategy, where a lot of states need to take preemptive action against ensuring that they're not threatened and their survival is not of threat, right? I think this also means that by virtue of this, the extension of aggression is one that requires a response. But thirdly then, what is the mechanism of war that we're going to employ, or this state should employ? I think, or will employ. I think it's simple, that we live in a modern era of military strategy. There are large chunk of the time how these strategies will probably look like are long-range attacks, targeting, for example, landways, targeting, for example, runways, targeting, for example, important and critical infrastructure like telecommunication towers. So this is more of a crippling of Israel as an entity, as a defensive mechanism, as opposed to one of killing all the Israelis on the ground, which somehow they're doing right now. I think this means few things. Number 1, that the level of commitment that they're putting in isn't going to be extreme to the point of putting boots on the ground. This means that they're able to, and I think this later handles argumentations around will they win the war. I'll talk about it later. But this also means the likelihood of them losing the war against Israel is far less by virtue of how modern military strategies allow for this. But secondly, it's also about a ability to I think this is the principle at best, right? It's forcing Israel into the negotiation table. Because notice that Israel is a brat within the system of the Middle East, protected by the United States. The problem is that they're unwilling to come to the negotiating table, especially since they're stoking up too much tension within the Middle East region. This is how we force Israel into the negotiating table because of a few things. Number one, a war of attrition is one that they don't want to engage with. Against 6 different states, it's extremely hard for you to maintain a war of attrition. But number two, it also means that Israel now sees that, hey, people are threatened by my existence and this is something that's bad. This also means that, more likely than not, they're now willing to come to the negotiation table and maybe reduce or de-escalate and de-radicalize within the region. We think this is a preferable outcome, and it's the only way in which only way in which can pull Israel back into the negotiating table. But thirdly, it's also the reality that Israel is committing a lot of resources in the war against Palestine. By virtue of this, they can't fight a war on multiple different fronts. They need to commit and choose a war in which they can win. This means that it is of critical time and a critical juncture for all these states to attack. The reason being that Israel just cannot defend against you on those examples, right? But lastly, and here's where I want to talk about isolation, here's how I want to talk about 2 parts. And I think this is a bit more interesting about military strategy as well. It's about what is war necessarily and what does this look like. I think it's about talking about 2 things, and this is 2 strategies that can be employed. Either A surprise attack on Israel to cripple, and I think that's what I explained earlier, but B, that oftentimes in war, it starts off with an announcement of, hey, I'm going to attack you. This announcement of war actually preempts the previous step, which means that before you start your long-range attacks, before you start your crippling of Israel, you're able to tell Israel that you are becoming a problem here. We see you as a threat. You need to start de-radicalizing and going down. Announcement of war is actually important. This also means that even if you talk about negotiating table, beyond the United Nations, etc., I think it's also about talking on a multilateral level. We talk about Palestine's sustainability, sustained existence, etc. But lastly then, and here's where I immediately take out this, what happens if the parties lose. I think this is isolated from outcome, either whether Israel wins or loses. I think the reality is that this action creates a signaling effect for a large chunk of states around the world, right? This means that not only is this conflict isolated to Israel and Palestine, this is a conflict which is spreading across the Middle East and could escalate into a potential world war. This signaling effect actually pushes states to be far more punitive against Israel, to ensure that Israel doesn't do war crazy things that start bombing pages and harming other individuals and potentially sliding into a war. I know it's 6, I'll take a POI from closing opening. None, really. So this isolation from outcome means that 2 things. Even if they lose the war, that states receive a message that there's an inherent problem in the Middle East region. This is completely different from talking about Ukraine and Russia, where it's often bilateral wars that happen. A multilateral war happening is literally the start of a large chunk of world wars. When multiple different actors are engaged in conflict is where you slide down into World War III. By virtue of this, that's where states feel a rallying factor to take more punitive actions against Israel, for example, or to try to force Israel to the negotiation table, where we see actors like the EU have been very wishy-washy in their stances, and the only state that really supports Israel is the United States. I think a 2-party state, a 2-state against the world thing doesn't really work in that sense, because the United States can't really defend Israel for it. For those very reasons, it's simple. That's strategy. It's the best time to do it. And by virtue of this, even if you win or lose, the change that happens by the result of this is something that's inherently necessary for the world.
Thanks, speaker, for that speech. Do you want to go off bench? I invite hello.
The first thing that I want to explain before directly engaging with OT is the origin of the 6-day belligerent war. So the first thing is because this was inherently originated from post-colonial states, right? Which means in terms of the state actually wanting to gain independence from the British colonial rule, there was an instance where this originated the Six-Day Belligerents, right? But secondly, because of the heightened tensions that were present during the Nakbas in the 70s, which means what happened in hindsight was that the Arab countries were really fucked up over their fucked up economically, which means because there was an oil embargo war, which means it originated the Six-Day Belligerent War, which means that in terms of in the past, this originated because they wanted to actually overcome the oil embargo war and because they wanted to gain independence from the states, from the British colonial rule. This is the origin of how it came into place. So the second, so what this means is during that time, Israel, they were backed by not only the US but also the UK. Because of this, it became an important part for the Zionism movement and it emboldened them for them to continue the war because they had a reason in order to actually go on with this form of Zionism or this idea of Zionism because they had a reason of how this Six-Day Belligerent was going on, right? But the conclusion to this context is the past origin of the Six-Day Belligerent War has a deeper meaning, and it originated from the post-colonial rule, but also because of the oil embargo war with the Arab countries in the past, which showed the origin of how this came into place. And I'll explain to you why exactly this is so harmful, and why exactly, even if OG says that this is a strategic move for them for the future, we don't think that's the case because there will be a lot more harms on them. The first thing I want to respond to is OG says that U.S. backing isn't going to be extreme because of a couple of reasons. Firstly, because of the election, and U.S. includes centrist and moderate people that they want to pander to for their votes, which means that they have a couple of ideologies that they want to protect in order to get much more votes to win the election. But secondly, the second reason they give is that they just don't want to engage in a war with multiple different states because of what will escalate the high tensions. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, we think that this is untrue. If the moderates or liberals or centrists ultimately did not agree with this, and did not agree with this support from the U.S. to Israel, they would have done this in the past, right? They would have had a bigger decision or a bigger say, which means that during the 30-day attack on Gaza, they would have ultimately pandered towards the U.S. government to not actively antagonize these states, which means that if what we see in status quo already proves that the voters or the people on the ground do not have that much power to actually pander towards the decisions that the U.S. government will do, they will continue to put boots on the ground in these Middle Eastern countries. They will continue to put boots on the ground in Israel in order to actually go against these Middle Eastern people, right? But secondly, they're talking about the current situation, the current present U.S. But we're on OO, we're talking about the future, which means in terms of if they do not actually if they continue to support, if they do not put on boots on the ground now, in the future, they would, because it is already proven that Kamala Harris is in solidarity with Israel and will continue to be in solidarity with Israel and give all the multiple resources, like the equipment and also the equipment of war and the arms on the ground to support Israel regardless, because there is a sentiment that the Jews have been enslaved and the Jews have always been needing support from the U.S. because that has been their origin country. And understand that U.S. has a lot of resources, which means they have the strongest military in the world. They have a lot of equipment in order for them to actually be back in the war, which means what OG claims as U.S. not being a very contributing actor in the round, it doesn't really make sense because they have always been in support of Israel and they will always have the sentiment that they will support the Jews in Israel and always give military support for them. A couple of things set up then. The first thing is that what do we think is the alternative to attacking? Because we just don't support attack. This debate is centered around the belligerents, which means number one, how do you make sure the belligerents have more control after what happens when they attack? How do you ensure that these states are protected? And how do you ensure that there is a form of damage control as to what will happen in the instance that they will attack? This has to be focused on the most vulnerable stakeholders, which is the belligerents. But secondly, these states just got independence after the origin of the post-colonial independence, which means number one, we want them to have we want for them to keep their relationship with the British colonial states and the British colonial masters, right? But secondly, we don't want any forms of attacks because we want them to have a form of self-defense, which means they wouldn't do anything that would attack. Well, they wouldn't do attacks towards the states, but they would have a form of self-defense, which means that we don't give them a reason for them to actually be blamed by any form of countries, and they will just act they'll just support passively, like how they were advocating for Palestinian rights and how they have like sanctions on these Israel states, which means they aren't going to like directly attack these countries. They are just going to stand in solidarity because they also have their interests as a country to protect themselves, right? The framing here is simple because firstly, the dynamics is asymmetrical. In hindsight of the oil embargo war, they would lose anyway. So the strategy on Gulf is wrong because number one, there is already a huge harm that exists during the oil embargo war where they just lose out because of the power of the US. But Gulf has to support them going to lose out in hindsight of the war. They did not better off anyway. And number two, we're going to remove the scale of casualties that might happen in terms of retaliation. What this means in terms of retaliation is number one, it's going to enforce the Zionist idea, which means because they retaliate so much, the Zionists now have a reason to the right to self-defense and the right to attack. But number two, it's going to expose a lot of harms towards these states because it means the Middle East is going to be like in the target of America. But then firstly, in terms of like power asymmetry, the first thing I'll explain is what is the situation with Israel currently. Israel has a lot of the backing from the US, and not only the US, but also the UK, which means that they have multiple forms of support in terms of number one, weaponry, but number two, equipment like aid and also equipment that will actually sustain themselves. Although Gulf says that there is no likelihood in terms of like US intervention, there is still other country intervention like the UK, which are also bigger countries, which means the scale of support on towards Israel is extremely huge, and the UK is also connected with these states that just gained independence from the UK itself and the British master rule, which means number one, they're just going to lose out on the support from their post-colonial rule, but number two, it means it's going to fuck them over economically, like what happened in the past with the oil embargo war. This means, in terms of like strategy, OO claims proves to you that number one, we're just protecting these states and not hiding the tensions that will happen, like what happened in the past. And we prove to you that this is factually what will occur if they were to take the strategy. Everyone proud to oppose.
Thanks, Nico, for that speech. To further down bench, I invite you. Thank you.
Just doesn't give a shit lah. That's why I don't care anymore.
Sorry, man.
I don't care.
Why you look so agitated, man? This guy is called. So apparently the UK, which is having one of the worst economic periods of its time, where inflation is nearly times 5 and my girlfriend used to pay 15,000 ringgit for a visa because of how shit the UK economy is and the cost of living is so high, apparently this economy is able to sustain an Israeli defense of 3 belligerent nations to the point where the US pulls out. But apparently then incentives don't matter in the round panel. Historical context that happened 50, 60 years ago matter more than the actual analysis that comes from Akasha's speech. If these are the metrics that you want to evaluate the debate by, then I think that you guys are like basically using the logic of Israel in the round and like how they justify the attack on Palestine. But I have some rebuttals first before I get into like why Akasha's case is case unique. Number one, this entire framing that comes out from OO is problematic right from the get-go. Because I don't see why gaining independence and the methods where you gain independence is important insofar there are pre-existing issues that exist within these nations to make them more concerned. We bring this up. There are attacks done in Lebanon via pages. There are attacks done to Iraq. There are attacks done to neighboring nations. And if you don't buy any of this as saying that it's untrue because the past context doesn't matter in the present, weigh both context and panel. Which matters more within the round? The idea of the history or the idea that you are potentially going to be attacked by Israel once they're done with Gaza. I think the weighing is better towards the potential attack because you probably have the greater incentive to protect the people within the nation. So by their own framing that the nations can protect themselves, they lose because if you truly care about protecting yourself, then you're probably going to side with our side and attack Israel before they attack you because of that fear of potential attack which outweighs any historical context, even if it does exist. The second idea is support is good for the USA because US votes don't matter because like US votes don't matter because we see that happen a few years ago. Number one,
This is already preempted. I don't know why we're still debating about this. We talked about the election cycle. So when attack happens right now or in the near future, then you're probably going to have an outcome where the US doesn't attack. But secondarily, on this entire idea of a future where they would. Even if that is true, and notice that there is no mechanization coming out from the USA really loves Israel. I think if the USA really loves Israel is your only mechanization, then there's an extent to that support. Because number one, fighting foreign wars directly is extremely unpopular within the US since 9/11 and since the invasion of Iraq. But number two, because the fact that it's not popular in office either. No one likes to bleed out money to foreign wars, which the voter base doesn't understand in the comparative where they could be spending their money in the US on US jobs and the US economy. And this is something that is reflected within the election. That is why we literally had a debate yesterday about the GOP withdrawing from the anti-invasion stance. Third thing, other countries won't attack because of this dire of protecting themselves. I think that this doesn't stick in the round at all. It's already meant why other countries will have a signaling effect to attack. This already been layered in mechanization. They can't just refute this with an assertion. But I'll take them a step better. Why will these nations attack in the first place? Number one, because of everything that came out in PM. But number two, because of the fact that they see not only that there's an attack going on, but the proximity of the attack. Maybe before this, the context is that Israel is attacking Gaza and there's some, I don't know, whatever bullshit Western reason that there's complex nuances to the reason. But there is no complex nuance to an attack on Lebanon. There is no complex nuance to an attack on Egypt. There is no complex nuance when Israel extends the war and the war is extended into the Middle East. If you don't attack within that, then you need to give us context and explanation as to why this would happen. Third idea, we lose out to the fourth idea, we lose out to the power of the US. Again, this is like something that is a symphony logic. If you truly believe that the US is going to give an infinite amount of money to Israel, sure we can lose out. But insofar as a lot of the things that they say are going to happen, like boots on the ground in Israel, and why would the US send its active military to Israel in order to fight a war so far away? I've already explained to you it's unpopular. I don't think that it sticks in the round. Why is Akasha's case winning? Number one, it immediately outframes off bench by taking out the biggest contention that they have in the round. So far from LO, there is no mechanization as to why this is untrue that can stick in the round in the comparative as I explained in the rebuttals. Number two, explains the most important issue on our bench, which is even if we lose, why it is fine for the future of the Middle East and retaliation towards Israel and the treatment towards Israelis. But number three, I think it's also important because it explains to you in detail on how this war will proceed by giving you two-pronged approaches towards like how it will happen. Maybe it's a direct surprise attack, maybe it's a long-term attack. We explain the positive implications of both. Note panel that you can't let CG get away with any other extensions beyond this because number one, it explains the most important actors in the round, which is the belligerent states and what are the potential impacts to them on both outcomes. But number two, explains to you why the biggest bad actor, which is the USA, will not get involved. These are the two most important things in the round because they are determinants to our success. The worst case on our side is we lose a war, but we've already given you the potential benefits that exist even if we lose that war against all the odds. On their side, the worst case is that their Zionism, which they claim is really bad, continues being perpetually bad. The worst case on their side is once Israel is done with Gaza, they start doing what they're already doing with Lebanon and Iraq, which is attacking them instead. The worst case on their side is you give Israel an upper hand against these states once they're done wiping out Gaza. So I don't see why you're going to talk about a potential loss of life, how it's any better on your side. But even if what Hopbench is true on some merit about like Zionism, the entire argument, the first thing to say is, does the relative slight marginal increase of Zionism actually matter in the round? Because Zionism is already at its peak pedal. If you can justify an active genocide within a region of people that you colonized and then butchered, I think that the idea of your victim mentality and what you believe is right and wrong is already so distorted anyways. If you can attack your neighbors, if you can justify all of this, I don't see why the extension matters in the round. Before 6 POI for closing? No. The second thing is, even if Zionism is increasing even further, I don't see why an increase in sentiment is suddenly going to equal to an increase in military ability. Because I think that the point where I've already explained to you that the US won't intervene at the very least, and I'm pretty sure the US is a majority Jewish Zionist, then that's the point where the capacity of Israel, even with that increased amount of sentiment, to turn that into capability is going to become extremely problematic. So maybe they do win on the entire idea that Zionism does extend itself. It's unclear why that's a beneficial thing in the round of why that area of debate matters in the round. Let's talk about why we outweigh every bench in the debate. Off bench, number one, right off the get-go, there is a certain level of resilience to our case. We explained to you the worst case outcomes on our side of the house in great detail. We explained to you why the US won't intervene, and you can use all of those arguments to apply towards the EU as well. Maybe you can talk about the economy and also about the fact that they're very wishy-washy in status quo. Anyway, but the secondary thing is, and I think that this is the most important argument in the round panel, if we lose, it's fine because of the ideas that we've already talked about. If we lose, it's fine because it's about the idea of fighting against Israel before they get the chance to attack you. It's about protecting yourself before Israel escalates the war as they've already shown that they want to do. And we really win over OO because we argue the reality of the context. We argue the present. We argue the active incentive of the actor instead of the past incentive of the actor. Clear, OG.
Next speaker for the speech to close our opening half, I invite Diallo to here.
Panel, if you're an IR major, I think at some point you will learn history and you will recognize the reason why history matters is because that is exactly how it affects the current relationship of countries, right? And I think it's the way that it bleeds out until now. Reasons being, right, I think like the first, I don't think they can just say that like, oh, the 6-day war context does not matter. Then why the fuck would you put it in the motion? But number two, but because of the fact that that actually does matter, they cannot also get away with a lot of these preemptives of like, oh, this doesn't matter, therefore nothing really happens. Then I don't know what the fuck are you debating, right? I think three key pieces of framing. The first is that this debate has to talk about whether if you engage into these military attacks, if you will benefit out of it or not. We say to you that it will not benefit these people that are attacking Israel, but also it will make the whole attack that Israel does impose to any other countries involved will be much more larger in scale. I don't think this is like the impact that they're actually trying to engage coming from Kamala right now, right? But I think secondly, I think it's also the way that how do you control the narrative of like how do you actually bring people who have done like war crimes to court, right? I think like although like you don't really think that the ICC actually cares or matter, the point is that currently there is a heightened amount of attention on Israel in order for them to actually be brought to justice, to be actually punished, right? I think like currently this is actually going on. We have a lot of more approval on the United Nations. I don't think the impact coming from them about like, oh, getting people to negotiate is something that is unique anyways, because it's already happening, right? Because they think like a lot of our points are like asymmetrical or happening anyways. I think that a few things that we need to talk about. The first is generally about how that number one, they say that this debate doesn't talk about like US interventionism because of like the elections or like low voter base, right? But the point is that there has been a lot of US interventions that were not popular with voter base anyways, but they still attack them. The reason being is because when you're already in power, you don't really give two fucks because you're already in power. But also because the US has consistently sent people to war because they want to. They are the superpower in the global hegemony anyways, so they do things out of justifications of the reasons why they do, right? I think like, so they cannot just say like, oh, US interventionism is not going to happen. But it matters why the post-colonial, but second, why does the post-colonial state context matters, right? Because these people were generally entrenched because of the fact that that happened, right? Not only does the 6-day war actually made it more difficult for them to stand back up from economic and social policies, but because of the fact that currently that they are in instability, instigated from the 6-day war, moving on forward, what's happening right now is that if you as one of like the members of the 6 belligerent states that are happening in this debate, what that means is that you're only going to be entrenched even more. What this means is that if you notice, it's not, the point is to mention how the 6-day war was actually the starting point in which all of these countries were just generally fucked and going down from below afterwards, right? I don't think, oh, okay, let's skip on the whole idea that like, oh, historical context doesn't matter. Then I don't know why you're taking IR, right? Then, the last thing that we're going to talk about is generally how these countries are actually going to like, how they are going to be dealt with even more further, right? I think it affects them even more, yes.
Emma, when was the last time US put boots on the ground in foreign soil?
I mean, think they still do now. They still intervene in a lot of people's economy. They also send a lot of like military help to Israel. I don't think like they are actually not doing anything at all, because they're still actually in some parts of the Middle East still trying to find oil. And the reason why this 6-day war context matters is because this was the way in order for them to even justify the Middle East intervention to happen in the first place. Panel, note that if currently you do this military attack, the Middle East or all of the nations in the six-day war are going to be even more entrenched. They are already intervened by the US because of the whole thing that happened afterwards. But it's also the way that I don't think the US is going to stop anytime soon. Even Kamala Harris, that before this had like a very progressive stance about the US-Israel policy, decided to still support Israel anyways. Point is, they don't give two fucks and they would do it anyways, right? I think that after we control about this narrative about oh, the US doesn't matter, I think that the idea about power asymmetry still holds from Kamala, right? Because the point is that number one, I think this will result into much more casualties and will entrench this states even further, right? The point is to understand that currently they are not even in like the best state of democracy. They are not a stable countries anyway, and because of the fact they lack the capacity in order for them to even fight. Look, Lebanon is a country that still uses pagers. The reason the pager attack happened was because they are not even in a good state of economy. I don't know whether the country that you know is actually still using pagers, but it's also the way that because of that. Number two, if you are the person that want to shift the narrative about what happens in regards to like the whole attack happening, then it's so much more better for you to have the right to self-defense. Once you are a country that people know that you are a victim as a result of all of the things that Israel has done, you cannot say that this has nothing to do with the Gaza war, because whatever that happens with the Gaza war entrenches and bleeds into other soils, right? What happened because of the fact that whatever that happened in the Sinai like lands were the things that were also affecting all of these other countries because they are bordering. Whatever that, because if you actually attack the people in Palestine, I don't know why you're not talking about why these people will go for refuge in Egypt. They will go to Lebanon. They will go to like any of these like 6-day countries, right? I read you Syria and Jordan as well, because generally these people do have some level of interest about the Gaza war. I don't think you should be as like any of like these states to actually impose an attack on Israel, because number one, notice how this is going to be a key shift framing, a key shift narrative in terms of like how it's going to be very much difficult for you to buy into the idea that you are the allies of Gaza, right? I think like this is the point that you need to understand. What's going to be even more difficult is that currently you still have countries that have like strong military capacities that are in Europe or any other countries, right? That are still on the fence about the whole idea of like, how do you support Gaza? I think like the point in which that you do this military attack in the name of Gaza or in the name of like trying to make sure that like that you get to control any kind of like outcome from the Israeli attack, I don't think it's going to actually result into like anything better. Not only the narrative in terms of how it's going to affect the Gaza war, but also number two, it will not actually help for your situation because you have more casualties. You have to go out of your way to actually give out more military support. Notice how Egypt also doesn't actually have the capacity. They cannot even accept more refugees. Syria is in an even more dire war because of the thing that's happening in their own country with this whole war. I don't think then we should let OG take away with all of these things, those reasons.
Thanks, Nico, for that speech. To open up the closing half, I wipe the broke up. Here.
The issue of this opening exchange is simple. OD is stop sounding that dire case and OD is to go read a damn newspaper. Here are the issues with OD's case and why is he going through this debate? Two things. Firstly, it's exclusively on CG. We take the hard stance. Understand that OG wants to say things like, oh, we want only bomb infrastructure. And then they say things that they want Israel to de-escalate the war from Palestine, they want to de-radicalize. How does this work insofar as you don't take the hard stance, insofar as you don't have any like significant harm onto the country in and of itself? We tell you that under CG, we're the only side that actually does something to Israel. We're the only side that wants to actually harm them. This means that what we are likely to support under CG is that we're probably going to do things like, oh, I don't know, like bomb their military base, like scroll their military items or whatever, right? We tell you that the way that this is going to work, that these countries have to actually make an impact on Israel for them to actually pair, for them to actually pull out. Insofar as OG gives you a soft line stance, and insofar as they don't give you any like proving as to why this soft stance of bombing, like I don't know, like bombing a building or something is going to help Israel, suddenly realize that they're doing bullshit, suddenly realize that Israel is wrong and whatever, and they're going to suddenly pull out. I don't understand how this stands. But then, why is this us and why is these countries actually doing something impactful towards like Israel in the first place? The prerequisite to all the impacts that OG gives to you, right? Because understand that the entire case and all the impacts that cause you is that they want Israel to suddenly de-escalate and de-radicalize. But why is it that only when these countries does so choose to make like some sort of impactful harm onto Israel, that this will work? Two things. Firstly, is that if you only bomb their infrastructure, and if you don't do anything else beyond that, it is not likely that Israel is going to care. It is not likely because you bomb, like, I don't know, some office building, they are going to start suddenly pulling out military people from Palestine, right? We tell you that for them to start de-radicalizing, for them to start pulling out of Palestine, they first need to actually like face some sort of impact. They first need to like suffer. If not, they won't like actually have the incentive. If not, Israel won't have the incentive to actually like pull out in the first place. Right? We tell you that under siege, that we're the only only under siege can you like actually make Israel pull out and make Israel de-radicalize. But then a few exceptions then. Firstly, I'm going to pick up all over to tell you why these states need to act specifically now. Two things. Firstly, no thank you. Firstly, why is it that like the USA is not going to intervene? Right? Because the whole entire case tells you that, oh, actually, USA is intervening, blah, 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 blah. Dude, legit, right? After the pager bombing in Lebanon, USA pulled out military support from them because Israel never told them about the bullshit that they're going to do in Lebanon in the first place. Military officials in USA are literally pissed off at Israel, which means they are already pulling out military support, which means they are already like trying to screw Israel anyways. They're probably pissed off at them. So I don't understand why they're going to like suddenly, like, I don't know, support them, like they're going to suddenly send, like, I don't know, like 1,000 guns to them or something, right? We tell you that in status quo, now that USA is already like currently like kind of angry at Israel, and already kind of pissed off at the military officials for doing some shit in Lebanon that they never told them about in the first place. We don't understand then why is it that they're going to suddenly intervene. But why is this important to debate, right? We tell you that this is important to debate insofar as to prove to you why is it that these states can act specifically now insofar as like Israel's biggest like supporter, insofar as Israel's like only like military supporter is already pulling out, is already not trying to support, it's like already not like supporting them, right? We tell you then that once like since right now USA is already pulling out military support, it is now like it's necessary for them to now add on to this, and in the first place it's important for them to now like doing military attack, right? But then we tell you that what they say about like UN and like incentives and like UN like already like calling out Israel and shit, it doesn't do anything, right? The UN has called out Israel for so long, and yet Israel says they don't care. So we don't understand why the whole entire case of like how UN is already calling out is enough to like make Israel back up from Palestine. Insofar as Israel themselves already say that they like don't care about whatever bullshit UN is going to do to them, right? We tell you that under siege, that specifically when you do so choose to like actually pressure Israel to do something, insofar as you do so choose to pressure Israel to like back down from like military case, from military attacks on Palestine, then and only then will you get the impacts that OG was positive to you, right? But before that, POI is over to you.
Yes. Your case is actually the same with OG about US interventionism anyways. So, like, the point is currently foreign policies are still geared by the US to support Israel. Even though they didn't like Lebanon, they are most probably still going to send arms because they will send arms with Israel.
Okay, anyways, like the reason we tell you that this is important, right? The reason we say that this is different from OG is because number one, OG takes a soft fucking stance that they don't actually do anything. Number two, is we tell you that the Delta under siege is that we're only side that takes us and we're only side that actually debates the damn debate, right? But all wants to make an incentive debate. Fine. Why is it that these states have the incentive to do military attacks right now? Two things. Firstly then, is that other countries like South Africa who already like, I don't know, like want to screw over Israel are probably going to back them up. Which means that whatever bullshit that all wants to posit you as to why these states don't have the capacity to do so, I don't care. Capacity to do so, this doesn't work anyways, right? But then secondly, we tell you that it's feasible for them to do so insofar as right now USA is already pulling out of Lebanon, insofar as USA is already like reducing its like military support towards Israel in the first place, right? We tell you that states need to seize the opportunity now, specifically when the USA is already currently not doing anything, and before the USA goes back and comes back and gives them more military support, we tell you that they need to do it now, right? But what is the impact then? Because we think the OG doesn't actually deal with this, right? We tell you that once these countries does so choose to go for this military attack, this becomes a tipping point for Israel to actually back down. This becomes a tipping point for Netanyahu to actually stop, right? But why is this inherently true? Two things. Firstly, that we tell you it becomes a tipping point for Netanyahu insofar as the people on the ground themselves are impacted, insofar as his own military soldiers are impacted because of the fact that these countries, like multiple countries by the way, it's not just one country bombing them by the way, so I don't understand what ocean say here. We tell you that when multiple countries try to attack Israel, even though Israel is already depositing all of its like resources towards Gaza and like depositing all its resources like military support towards other places, we tell you that it becomes a tipping point for his military to like tell him, for his own military commanders or whatever, to tell him that no, this is bullshit and we cannot keep that kind of soldiers die just because we are a selfish bitch. Secondly, then we tell you that because in parliament, where like people are already like against Netanyahu, like some of his parliament members are quite literally already against it. Some of his own parliament members are already quite literally against whatever he's doing in Gaza. We tell you that this becomes a tipping point for more of them to like actually flip against it, for more of them to actually support pulling out of Gaza, insofar as more and more countries are putting pressure onto him, insofar as more and more countries are already like telling him to fuck off and to tell him to like get out of Gaza in the first place, right? We tell you that the reason this is different from OG is simple. Two things. Firstly, that is that CG explicitly deals with the impact. We tell you we need to trade off the people on the ground. We tell you that we don't really care even if some people in Israel die, insofar as the impact that we get is larger, insofar as the scale of impact as we get, as to why they're going to pull out Palestine is inherently important. Secondly, then we prove to you why specifically that when you ask these countries to go for military attacks, why specifically that when you give these countries when these countries have the incentive to do so, especially right now in terms of war, why is it that Israel is going to pull out Palestine? We think that for all these reasons, this is a clear CG win.
I think everyone can be nicer, guys. I get, sorry, I get debate very intense and stuff, but all of you ought to be nicer.
Yeah, guys.
Relatively, I'm the most chill one.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Cool. To open up CEO, I invite you from up here.
Waiter said I have 1 minute, right?
Yes, you have a minute. You constitutionally have a minute. ABK and WDC is you have a minute to write, then you come up, then you must speak again.
Oh.
So I always abuse the 1 minute, I just start timing.
I know it's 20 seconds.
What, he's going to try to do the toilet in 1 minute?
No. I'll abuse 1 minute to 2 minutes.
So 1 minute, I'll run to the toilet because that is.
Alright, give it a time. Wow.
What?
Extra 3 seconds,
But
right?
I really... This much.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Oh, let's OG get away with their uncharitable and falsely perfect. This is detrimental. I'll prove a few problems here. The first, OG posits an uncharitable war mechanization, how they're actually going to attack Israel. I think you cannot run a mechanism of just attacking buildings and stuff. I think as insofar as you claim you will not harm people on the ground, I think you always indirectly harm people. I think the intuition is simple. When you destroy runways, people like have to rebuild, people have to struggle to rebuild these things. If you destroy roads, right, people will find it harder to navigate into cities, for example. The second problem here is that we don't have a sufficient comparative counterfactual in this debate from OO. They touch on ICC incidents or something, but they don't really mechanize it. I think firstly I want to clarify on the burden. It is very simple. It is to stop Israel from committing genocide like Palestine, for example, right? But then I think the easiest counterfactual comparative here is to say that there are sanctions by superpowers. I think, okay, comparative to OG here to say that they harm people on the ground, but it's much better on outside in terms of scale. I think firstly it's easier to cascade into multiple nations to then block you, prohibit you from
stop trading with them. Because people side with superpowers more than others. So therefore, they say, for example, African nations like to side with China if they do like boycott Palestine or boycott Israel. Sorry. And then like second thing here is like this weighs into the trade-off of people being harmed economically because governments now feel more urgent because they have their economy also suffers because Israel has now more enemies to block them out from trade and become that trade nowadays, for example. The second thing is like peace talks, right? I think like superpowers have like incentives to amplify peace talks. The first one is like, for example, to protect regional interests in the Middle East. So I think one crucial, very practical example would be like the Suez Canal, right? Like a lot of the trade goes through there. I think European or American powers have very, very incentive to like protect this. I think it's likely to limit warfare to like Israel as well, and it's also part of the counterfactual. To say we limit the regional warfare into these like states, like mechanisms like Abraham Accords, for example. And then like besides, I think there are like several mechanisms in status quo to hold Israel accountable for their war crimes in the first place. There's the first, like social media for like teenagers, where they constantly criticize the government for Netanyahu for doing these things. The second is like journalism. I think it worsens the nation's image progressively and really badly. The third thing is like foreign bodies that actively show they hate Israel. I think we call the same logical thing from OG here, because now Israel also wants to get peace talks. The Delta is scared of harming people on the ground. I think the third thing here is why peace talks like won't be one-sided towards superpowers or won't exclusively benefit superpowers. I think the first thing is, if it's unfair, I think these Middle Eastern nations have the rationale to not sign peace talks in the first place. The second is like probably like there's public backlash from like other communities to tell these people to tell these superpowers from having other economic motives than resolving for ceasefire in these regional this unstable regional states. I think the third thing is economic opportunities. I think first, America probably wants to like gain more trust for future economic purposes instead of the past. The second thing is like Middle Eastern countries probably like want to make more allies rather than having like more allies in the West, because now like for example they have very good economic trades like Saudi Arabia and USA. I think I'm going to segue shortly into my extension. The first thing is to say that reinforce and sidelines ongoing genocide in Israel. I think it's like a little bit co-opted by like but I'll show you where we differ. The first one is the focus will be sidelined from Palestine to like 6-day war, right? To say like, people now think about 6-day war more than they do about Palestine. The second thing is people are going to care less about like actual genocides committed by Israel. So like that is to say now people are going to talk less about Palestine, going to talk more about the 6-day war. I think the impacts here are simple. The first one is like less aid going to Palestine now because more media attention is going to be on like these 6-day wars. I think more is going to be people on the ground because the specifically so because the aid is required by people on the ground in these 6 days war. Because we are weighing on scale. I think firstly, the war is going to be larger in this like regional area now, like this larger area, because you include like almost all the countries in the Middle East. I think this means that you're going to have more casualties as well, because people are going to be like this also means that people are like you have a lot of regions, you have like a very big region, more people are like there's more possibility for people to be harmed. I think second thing we needed OG to weigh on like people on the ground, but they didn't. I think the comparative here is simple. There's more focus on resolving regional problems on a smaller scale now, because now the comparative analysis is that we resolve regional problems in Palestine rather than like in like whatever. Yeah.
How much headway have you made in resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict, doing your various strategies that you talk about?
I think like in status quo there are current mechanisms like I don't know, like Joe Biden or Donald Trump fighting for ceasefire. I think it worked for a while, but as long as on your side Netanyahu still has the incentive to attack Israel, to attack Palestine, I don't think how it's going to be resolved on your comparative. I think another unique contribution here, it also not affects people from these 6-day war states. I think this is where we differentiate, because O didn't talk about this. O only talks about people on the ground in Israel. I think the differentiation here is simple. People in 6-day wars are going to be more dissatisfied and more distrustful in their government, because firstly, like, they have economic sanctions now imposed on them. They struggle more in their daily life because now they cannot like afford or like whatever in our counterfactual. The second thing is like their brothers and sisters in Palestine don't get the fucking aid they need. That is to say that it like that's to say people of the same religion, people that share the same like relatability now are still suffering. That is to say they do not get the progress that they want. The third thing is like it's detrimental for few effects. The first one, people now have like super amplified incentive to like overthrow governments. That is to say that when they know their government is now supporting a genocide, they are now likely to overthrow the government as a result. I think the fact here is simple, is that because governments are now instead of helping to end the genocide in like Palestine, like they're redirecting the attention into like these other 6-day nations, into like these other wars. That way they do not actually end the genocide, they exacerbate the impact of the genocide. I think okay, yeah.
You do realize that on your side, nobody holds Israel accountable. Israel is still stopping aid anyways. Why is that you get aid on your side?
I think in our side, right, like we already have aid from like United Nations and stuff, right, like things that already help to like help people on the ground. Insofar as they don't show why people like in 6-day wars will will siphon the aid away from like Palestine. I don't think this is very charitable. I think there's also a principle now like to not hold people accountable for the government's actions. That is to say, okay, to some extent, principle exists on both worlds, but the comparative is on scale. Sanctions do more to incentivize governments into change. Because firstly, like on OG, right, sanctions do more to incentivize governments because now they directly impact people on the ground. I think directly engaging in OG here, we don't directly kill people through like bombings and like stuff, right? And also, right, we don't make people struggle to like build roads. And then like from CG, right, we win on people as well because now people have more trust in the government. Now people have more people don't like distrust the government and as a result don't riot. I think.
Thanks, Peter, for that speech. To wrap up the Gulf bench, I invite Gulf Whip. Thank you.
These words are not some good enough.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'll be taking down OG's place and why we'll telling you why we outweigh OG because they're actually winning this debate. But then secondly, we will take down C of their outrageous counterfactual and then we will take down OO last because I don't think they're winning the debate at all, right? So firstly, before I go on to outweigh OG here, what is the extension that my member already gave you, right? We tell you that Netanyahu won't get threatened because of multiple reasons already, right? This means that because because people have already started attacking, sanctions have already been done to these things, and Israel still hasn't ceased fire and Hamas ceased fire already. No, when the Hamas attack and then attack the infrastructures there, they attack the things, the places in Israel, Netanyahu never back down, never give up, you know. And then what is that? We told you how our trade-off is so worth it because we tell you, we will outweigh this on a scale here, right? The fact is, we would rather trade off the lives of few of the people on Israel for the fact that of what they have done on the grounds of Palestinian people because they have clearly done so much damage then. We told you the incentive and we told you why we different from their case, right? We told you that the tipping point, we give you more pressure. We give you more pressure where we actually threaten the entire Israel. We threaten with 5 countries attacking, bombing Israel. It is enough harm to Netanyahu in order for him to back down. That is the tipping point of the debate. That is why on our side of the house, whatever impact that we have that OG poses to you, we can call that too, but on a far larger scale, insofar that we actually ensure the actual damage, the actual solvency here, right? But what is the way that they are missing here? They are missing the actual way of the fact of urgency, right? The fact is, these vulnerable Palestinians, Hamas is backing down already, Palestinians are still getting bombed. Insofar as they cannot show you why it is so urgent, we tell you that we win on this few way here too, right? And OG doesn't give you. Bottom line is that we explicitly prove to you the tipping point of this debate, which is why we take over 002, right? Because of their soft stances, their soft lining case. But then moving on to taking out Jack's outrageous counterfactual here. This house supports motion. You don't really need a counterfactual, Jack. But then secondly, even if your counterfactual does exist, that sanctions this, right? There's like many problems with it. Firstly, if sanctions are that much of a harm, then Netanyahu would have already ceased fire. It doesn't really matter. But then you say you don't kill the people on the ground there, and that's why you win, right? But why is it so outrageous too? You know sanctions actually have enough impact on people on the ground because they are taking their money away from them. They do not have money to do this. Meaning when they do not have money, they do not have money to even money and power. They don't have the power to even take over the government. They do not have the power to throw a coup onto the government. Insofar as the government is so powerful, it is so strong, and it is taking over the entire Palestine. Is trying to still continue the war then, right? When Israel is already sanctioned, if superpowers are like so incentivized to be sanctioned in the first place, then they would have already done this. The problem here is that the United Nations are on the split whether to help these countries or not. They're not doing anything in the first place. They're not having a peace treaty in the thing. Oh, you need to help Israel. We have to come here because you have to stop the Palestinian. We have to stop the genocide in Palestine, which is why Netanyahu won't have this big enough incentive to even stop the genocide here, right? It's not any better on your side when you cannot even stop the war, which is what you want to burden push us to defend too, right? But secondly, what are the claims here, right? The claims here is that you will take away the entire FCO.
If status quo doesn't work, right, does sidelining Netanyahu's attention to neighboring countries in 6 days will work as well?
Sidelining your attention. Okay, the problem with this argument, I was just gonna give you this. The problem with this argument is that if the 6-day war are attacking Israel, the media will show that the 6-day war, the general belligerents, the 6-day war is attacking Israel and is stopping the Palestinian war. Insofar as Israel is always correlated with bombing Palestine, insofar as the media will still portray this because of the fact that 6-day war still has the incentive to stop them, the media will still portray as such. Meaning if you take away the things belligerents, even if you take away the very best case scenario that the belligerents of 6-day war is taken to the media to the attention, the net good is still there. Palestinians are not dead yet, and Palestinians are not going to be harmed even further. Netanyahu is going to still be stopped on our side of the house, meaning all of the impact still stands here, right? But the likelihood of the fact that the media will portray this thing is quite high. We tell you because it is proximate, because of its proximity with Palestine and its correlation. But even if it doesn't, the net good is still there. We tell you we win on this, right?
Yeah, so current status quo, you already have negotiations going on. At the same time, you're saying that the US is willing to withdraw any support to Israel. What's the urgency then?
If the sanctions are working, then Israel would already stop their aid to Palestine. If the US literally, because the thing is Israel doesn't care unless it fully have a full impact on Netanyahu on this ground. I do not understand this PR at all, right? But then moving on to taking down OO and cementing all the responses to OO, right? The UN is already on a split of whether or not to support or not, right? All's claim runs on pure assertion that everyone wants to help Israel then. Rather, if the UN cared in a single bit, they would probably start a war already. They would probably not even do any, they would probably take the waste in the incentive to another scale, the level there. Then they keep pushing to the EU on the fence, and which is completely contradicts your side of the house. Because when you tell us that all the other countries like the UK and US will suddenly back Israel against these states, right? We tell you that if you tell us that EU is already on the fence, there's a complete contention in your case on your side of the house, when you told us that they don't want to take a side then, right? But the US election is not done. That is a fact. That's why you have campaigns, right? The fact is, if you set some of the wars that the US hold on to, the people on the ground does not know, George W. Bush attack on these type of things are already an incentive for people on the ground to already be rioting against US then, right? Which is why we tell you that the way here is a scale of harm that you guys are doing, right? We tell you that we limit the scale of harm in so far as these countries can stop, and then they stop to attack the war. Post-colonialism, state doesn't matter in so far as we can. US doesn't matter. So proud to be CG.
Thanks, Stephen, for that speech. To wrap the round up, I invite the awkward here.
I'm the one-to-one snack here.
Oh, I love you so much.
You're not standing, you're sitting.
Oh, but I'm still the only one here.
starting my speech. Oh, pronunciation. Starting my speech. Okay. Panel, note that this is a PHS motion. The winning criteria under CO is that we want to prove why the harm is likely to happen under government side pass. We want to prove why the harm is comparatively worsened. I think CO has already won the debate. Well, best case of government is when you get peace, right? But the peace comes at a trade-off of like Israel hating at these surrounding countries more because you still go to like really detrimental warfare, right? But you also get the economical harm that these Egypt has to pump like continuous like infrastructure into it. When to prove why something is detrimental, the government still has yet to solve this issue, right? The second is at worst, you don't achieve anything through this warfare, but the harm economically and the harm against the people from these countries is still going to be there, right? On the first attack CG, right? CG tells us as to how Israel really don't care about the EU and the UN, right? I want to quickly point out how they don't really prove why, like they don't really prove why it's important in debate. I want to quickly point out how CG don't come with any exclusive benefit or analysis under OG. Sorry KFDI, you're knocking yourself out even if I don't have to defend you, right? Then secondly, so how two things that they exclusively come with. They say that Israel has like these surrounding countries have the incentives to do military attack, right? I think the clash under the closing house is what are these countries incentivized for? Is it for regional peace or is it for economy? We say that they're more likely to prioritize the economy for two fundamental reasons here. A, regional peace can still be achieved through other many ways. They don't harm the economy as much as the way you do under your side of the house, right? Or the problem isn't going to be that worse because on how things like Abraham Accords already exist at a large extent within status quo, you always maintain peace. But this also shows as an incentive for countries like Qatar and countries like Egypt to maintain the peace within regional, right? There's already this thing is already like exists at a certain extent within status quo, but you also but under the other side of the house, the trade-off that you have to do is that like you just harm the economy much more, right? And secondly, but I think that why is this detrimental is that the economy harm takes a way longer time for you to recover. I think during this period of time, you just harm way more people on the ground, right? Then secondly, is how the surrounding countries are also going to be affected. Things like EU countries, for example, because the Suez Canal is going to be blocked, or things like African countries that are contingent upon like Egypt's economy is still going to be harmed. I think its impact within this is going to be way worse, right? Secondly, is how they say, oh, we have to trade off people on the ground, right? Firstly, point out how they never justify this trade-off. We already posit to you how you will still harm the economy at a really large extent because you still harm surrounding countries, right? I think insofar as the weight does nothing to disprove this argument, this is going to be debate winning, which I'll further prove later. Fourthly, there is how they say, oh, Israel has a really powerful government. I'll quickly point out how this like line of analysis already knives are opening, right? Because if it is true that Israel has a really powerful government, there's less incentive for them to back down and to surrender within these ones in the first place. But secondly, is how we flip this argument over by saying, oh, sure, they have a powerful government, but at best, more people are going to they probably have less incentive to surrender. At best, more people on the ground are going to get affected because of it, because the time of the war is going to get prolonged, right? Secondly, down to do with CG is already out of the way. Secondly, this proof OG, right? OG tells us number one, Israel don't want to back out, now you force Israel to peace talks, right? I want to quickly point out how peace talks that Abraham anchored, things like signed by Israel between countries like Israel, Egypt, and Qatar, for example. It's already proven why there's incentive to work for peace with each other's status quo, right? Basically, it's not EU or surrounding African countries won't support this part because you instantly block Suez Canal because of the war. You also block economical opportunities from these African states that rely on it, right? If it is true from Britain's speech that EU is already EU's economy is already damn so bad, there is more incentive to build peace to stop this economical harm for existing in the first place. But even if you don't want to buy this idea and we say sure, EU will still continue to support the war, but it creates more regional instability because war now expands into other EU states that support these wars in the first place. I think the harm is just way much larger because you have more participating countries within the war, right? This is where even if Israel is now backs up at best in OG's case, right? They won't immediately just turn down this beef. I think the beef, I'll flip this over by saying how the beef is going to be comparatively worsened for three different reasons. Number one is how Israelis already hate Muslims in the first place. There's always a drive to go against Muslims because of things like past conflicts, for example. Then secondly is how America always wants to assert dominance within the region, right? The only way to get Israel to do this because other Islamic Middle Eastern countries don't have the best relationship with America, right? This is something where even if the government do change, America is still going to be incentivized to assert dominance, right? This is where opening opposition. They say that that you will always have good military
military power to attack this. They don't really show why there's incentive to use this, like why there's like incentive to like maintain, there's incentive. I think it's good for OG to point out on how there's no incentive to use this weapon. We prove to you why even at best where you don't have the incentive, like we prove to you why there are other motives that affect this. Secondarily, is on how OG says that surrounding countries are already attacking Israel. This is magical. We think that Lebanon and Iraq will still partake in the current Israeli war. This is something in which OO never engages, right? Two reasons why it's still comparatively better. Number one is how peace talks like Abraham Accords still exist. There's no incentive for to expand the war insofar as there's already existing economical benefits. Secondly, there is even if they do partake in the war, I don't think that it won't expand to affect affecting other African nations. Right? Thirdly, there is a sure, even at best when you force Israel to stop, you need this means that you need to win in order to force Israel to stop, right? In order for you to win, you need to spend a lot of resources to attack this, right? The reason why it's going to be detrimental is because these things are already, like these countries are already developing countries. People are already struggling economically. Within 3 years will happen. Number one, people on the ground, like probably looks like vulnerable Egyptians, are going to be affected because there's less resources to help them. Or even when a war happens, right? The economy is going to be at standstill. This directly outweighs OO's argument on how, because the scale of impact of people going to war and getting harmed are probably just men, but the scale of impact are probably is going to be more proximal because they also harm children, they also harm women within Egypt, right? But secondly is how there's less prioritization or sit down. But secondly, there's how there's less prioritization on economical policies, right? I think it's blocked surrounding African countries or EU, for example, because the Kenya is going to be blocked, right? We flesh this out way better than OO by proving you why it's independently important on scale. This affect a large war group of people, right? It affect basically every country that's surrounding the Middle East. Then thirdly now is on how Israel hates these countries more when the moment in which these wars break out, right? I think it's now much harder for you to solve this problem because Israel is up with more countries, right? Last thing I want to do with OO. My problem with OO is that they don't really prove about their counterfactual, but they just prove they don't really prove why it's better under their side of the house. But they also never do engage with the Israeli war is already ongoing in status quo, right? They never prove to you why it's beneficial under their side of the house insofar as this is something that's going to continue. Attacks will still happen, right? Their argument on how you harm people on the ground is going to be marginal because it's something that already happens in status quo. Here's how we come to debate and win this debate over open opposition, right? Number one, it proved to you on how when the war expands larger, you also have other Egyptians or other people who don't partake within this war. We need economical benefits, we can need economical harm. It's still going to be proximal to these people insofar as these people are going to be vulnerable and it's going to be vulnerable and just affects a large scale. Secondly, is to how the aftermath to solve these conflicts will be way worse because Israel has now opted with more countries being this detrimental. See over.
Thanks, speaker, for the speech. All speakers, very effective speeches. Cross the floor, shake hands, leave